I've been reading Hannah Arendt's book, the Origins of Totalitarianism, for some time now. I had a copy of this book back, 30, 40 years ago, and it's probably in storage in Portland with, another 3,000 or 4,000 of my books. But so I bought a new copy to have here, and it's really amazing, what she has to say. For example, totalitarian propaganda. This is from chapter 11, totalitarian propaganda. Only the mob and the elite can be attracted by the momentum of totalitarian itself. The masses have to be won over by propaganda. Under conditions of constitutional government and freedom of opinion, totalitarian movements struggling for power can use terror to a limited extent only, and share with other parties the necessity of winning adherents and of appearing plausible to a public which has not yet rigorously isolated from all other sources of information. Now, I would say people who only watch Fox News are rigorously isolated, but in any case, it was recognized early and has frequently been asserted that in totalitarian countries, propaganda and terror present two sides of the same coin. This, however, is only partly true. Wherever totalitarianism possesses absolute control, it replaces propaganda with indoctrination and uses violence not so much to frighten people, this is done in the initial stages when political opposition still exists, as to realize constantly its ideological doctrines and its practical lies. Totalitarianism will not be satisfied to assert, in the face of contrary facts, that unemployment does not exist. It will abolish unemployment benefits as part of its propaganda. Equally important is the fact that the refusal to acknowledge unemployment realized, albeit in a rather unexpected way, that old socialist doctrine, he who does not work shall not eat. Or when, to take another instance, Stalin decided to write the history of the Russian Revolution, the propaganda of his new version consisted in destroying, together with the older books and documents, their authors and readers. And then she goes on through all that. Since totalitarian movements exist in a world which itself is non-totalitarian, they are forced to resort to what we commonly refer to as propaganda. But such propaganda always makes its appeal to an external sphere, be it the non-totalitarian strata of the population at home or the non-totalitarian countries abroad. This external sphere to which totalitarian propaganda makes its appeal may vary greatly. And then she goes through all of that. And, she's talking about the Fuhrer and Hitler. In this respect, Hitler's speeches to his generals during the war are veritable models of propaganda, characterized mainly by the monstrous lies with which the Fuhrer entertained his guests in an attempt to win them over. Yeah, and then the footnote, see Hitler's Tigersprüche. In the summer of 1942, he still talks about kicking even the last Jew out of Europe and resettling the Jews in Siberia or Africa or Madagascar, while in reality he had already decided on the final solution and ordered the gas ovens to be set up in the fall of 41. Back to the book. The external sphere can also be presented by groups of sympathizers who are not yet ready to accept the true aims of the movement. Finally, it often happens that even party members are regarded by the Fuhrer's inner circle or the members of the elite formation as belonging to such an external sphere. And you're starting to see this happen in the Republican Party right now. And in this case, they too are still in need of propaganda because they cannot yet be reliably dominated. In order not to overestimate the importance of the propaganda lies, one should recall the much more numerous instances in which Hitler was completely sincere and brutally unequivocal in the definition of his movement's true aims. But they were simply not acknowledged by a public unprepared for such consistency. But basically speaking, totalitarian domination strives to restrict propaganda methods solely to its foreign policy or to the branches of the movement abroad for the purpose of supplying them with suitable material. Whenever totalitarian indoctrination at home comes into conflict with the propaganda line for consumption abroad, which happened in Russia during the war, and when the war with Hitler brought him into the camp of the democracies, the propaganda is explained at home as a temporary tactical maneuver. As far as possible, by the way, shades of Voice of America, which no longer is run by the, I did a whole show on this 2 weeks ago, and just nobody seemed to pick it up or it didn't go anywhere. Last night, Rachel talked about it, and everybody was like, whoa! The Broadcasting Board of Governors. I talked about Blanquita Cullum, my friend who was, who's a conservative who I've debated numerous times, but she's a friend. We share a common friend in Ellen Ratner. And Blanquita was on the Broadcasting Board of Governors. She was one of those people who oversaw the Voice of America. They've been replaced by a CEO, and that position is being filled by two 20-something right-wing Trump campaign runners. Anyhow, back to Hannah Arendt. She says, as far as possible, this distinction between ideological doctrine for the initiated in the movement, who are no longer in need of propaganda, and unadulterated propaganda for the outside world, is already established in the pre-power existence of the movements. And I would say, I mean, look at Paul Ryan's history here of what he says he's doing. Oh, I'm saving Social Security. And what he's actually doing, oh, he's handing it over to the banksters. Or I'm saving Medicare. No, you're voucherizing it. You're killing it. The relationship between propaganda and indoctrination usually depends upon the size of the movements on one hand and upon outside pressure on the other. She says propaganda is indeed part and parcel of psychological warfare, but terror is more. Terror continues to be used by totalitarian regimes even when its psychological aims are achieved. Its real horror is that it reigns over a completely subdued population. Where the rule of terror is brought to perfection, as in concentration camps, propaganda disappears entirely. It's even expressly prohibited in Nazi Germany. Propaganda, in other words, is one and possibly the most important instrument of totalitarianism for dealing with a non-totalitarian world. Terror, on the contrary, is the very essence of its form of government. The entire senior staff of the State Department resigned yesterday after Rex Tillerson visited them. 6 journalists now who were here in Washington, D.C. reporting, covering the protests during the inaugural. 6 journalists who were kettled by the police along with a couple hundred people, including, some, quote, bad guys, some guys who'd been smashing windows. The journalists were not. They were filming it. 6 journalists are being prosecuted right now. They've been charged with felony riot. $25,000 fine, 10 years in prison. You think maybe part of the media is starting to feel terrorized? Back to Hannah Arendt. Its existence depends as little on psychological or other subjective factors as the existence of laws in a constitutionally governed country depends upon the number of people who transgress them. Terror, as the counterpart of propaganda, played a greater role in Nazism than in communism. The Nazis did not strike at prominent figures, as had been done in earlier waves of political crime in Germany. Instead, by killing small socialist functionaries or influential members of opposing parties, they attempt to prove to the population the dangers involved in mere membership. Yes, those 6 journalists, none of them are from any of the big news agencies. This kind of mass terror, which still operated on a comparatively small scale, increased steadily because neither the police nor the courts seriously prosecuted political offenders on the so-called right. It was valuable as what a Nazi publicist has aptly called power propaganda. It made clear to the population at large that the power of the Nazis was greater than that of the power of the authorities, and that it was safer to be a member of the Nazi paramilitary organization than a loyal Republican, with a capital R. This impression was greatly strengthened by the specific use the Nazis made of their political crimes. They always admitted them publicly, never apologizing for excesses from the lower ranks. And such apologies were used only by Nazi sympathizers and impressed the population as being very different from the idle talkers of other parties. And now you've got a president who's talking terror. Yes, we should torture. Torture works. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. She goes on at some length in regard to this, but I recommend the book to you. Hannah Arendt, A-R-E-N-D-T, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And the book that I was reading from before, Milton Mayer, They Thought They Were Free. The Germans, 1938 to 1945 is the subtitle. These are books that have been out since basically just after World War II. And suddenly, they're really important books. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So